TheAnswer.com on the AM560 mobile app, on your Alexa-powered smart speaker, and on TuneIn, iHeart, and on Odyssey. If you're looking for the latest news, insight into what it means, and the sharpest opinion, there's only one station in Chicago where you can turn, and it's this one. We're AM560, The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. The Pentagon's former software chief and its first software chief quit his job, saying yesterday, China has already won the tech war, guaranteeing global dominance. Quoting him, "We have no competing fighting chance against China in 15 to 20 years. Right now, it's already a done deal. It's already over, in my opinion," said Nicholas Chalin, the former now Pentagon software chief. He believes that China will dominate the future by controlling everything from media narratives to geopolitics. The U.S., like Beijing, should have prioritized AI, machine learning, cyber capabilities, but we haven't. And while China is forcing compliance with tech companies, working with, quote unquote, meaning forcing those tech companies to heel at the feet of the Politburo there in Beijing, we have not done so well with our tech companies working collaboratively in furtherance of America's cybersecurity. So it's all over. It was fun while it lasted. Get ready for a dominant China. I'm not quite sure I take those comments at face value, and I'm not quite so sure that it's as inexorable as the former software chief at the Pentagon says. There's a lot of opinions, including those of Gordon Chang and other scholars, Chinese scholars and scholars in the geopolitical space that I don't think have such a cynical view of the possibilities of America's continued dominance as the world's superpower. But for more on the topic, we're pleased to be joined by Seth Jones. He's the Senior Vice President and Director of the International Security Program at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. He's got a new book out, which is in part right on topic, Three Dangerous Men, Russia, China, Iran, and the Rise of Irregular Warfare. Seth, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
It's great to be on. Thanks for having me.
What's your reaction to the comments by that guy who just resigned from the Pentagon?
I just don't think that's true at all. In fact, I think China certainly is a threat. But if you look at what the Chinese are doing, they're focused on a massive espionage campaign against American companies because of the advantages that those companies have right now on everything from artificial intelligence to nanotechnology to machine learning. But I do think, the U.S. has to recognize that this is a serious area where the Chinese are competing and attempting to compete. At the end of the day, I think the U.S. needs to leverage its advantages, and they are in an open economic system. So our companies remain extremely advantageous. So I think that's defeatist language, frankly.
So do I, and it just struck me as hearkening back to the defeatist language of the central planners of the Reagan era, who thought that Soviet Union's dominance of the world was similarly inexorable. It sounds like this Biden administration appointee, effectively, is upset there's not enough central planning going on. He's upset that the government isn't imposing its will on Google and other tech companies to force those companies to accede to whatever the priorities of the federal government is, rather than their responsibilities to their shareholders and employees, for example. And they all and people who take that perspective, always miss which is incredible, the internal contradictions of totalitarian societies and systems like communist China, just as they miss the internal contradictions of the Soviets.
Well, I think there's no question about that. And again, I would just point to the MSF, Chinese intelligence, as well as the intelligence components, including the offensive cyber components of the People's Liberation Army, the the military of the Communist Party of China. There is a massive espionage campaign against American companies. I mean, in addition to the government, to steal the very technology. And again, you don't steal that kind of technology from innovative U.S. companies if you're winning. You steal it because you're losing, and you need it, and you need it to be advantageous. And what Americans need to understand is the relationship, frankly, between the U.S. government and companies can be conflictual, and it should be in some ways. In China, it is much closer. The MSS and the PLA steal information from U.S. and other Western companies and give it to Chinese state-run companies to be more competitive. So there's a much closer relationship this is part of the impetus for the espionage. But again, the point here is that you don't do this kind of stuff if you're winning in a large degree. You do it because you're behind.
When you talk about irregular warfare with respect to these three enemies of America, Russia, China, Iran, you're obviously describing one aspect of irregular warfare, the cyber warfare, the piracy of intellectual property, and so forth. What else would, like, the Confucius Institutes that the Chi-Com set up at American universities be another example of this irregular warfare? Give us some other examples of things that are ongoing that policymakers should be paying attention to.
The Chinese, the Confucius Institutes are definitely part of this broader irregular aspect of warfare. The important part is a huge part of the Chinese competition right now is below the threshold of conventional and certainly nuclear war. At this point, they are not trying to get an advantage by sending conventional forces onto a battlefield. So it's the Thousand Talents program. This is the program that paid large sums of money to, say, the chair of the nanotechnology department at Harvard, Robert Lieber, to bring in that kind of expertise. It's the taking of islands in the South China Sea through dredging up sand and building signals intelligence, electronic warfare, missile platforms on those islands. Again, not by force, but through dredgers and fishing vessels overnight. It's the entire Belt and Road Initiative, which is using massive amounts of Chinese money, capital, to build roadways and ports in cities across Africa, Asia, and even Europe, and then to take that economic leverage and to push for political decisions on Taiwan, on Hong Kong, that are to China's advantage. So it's using economic, frankly, money to gain a political leverage. These are all aspects of competition well below the threshold of conventional war. It's the 5G market, Huawei, taking large amounts of data off of platforms and then bringing it back to Chinese intelligence. These are all aspects of what we call irregular warfare. And frankly, out of all the countries in the world, China is the country that gave the world Sun Tzu, the art of war, and Mao on guerrilla warfare. I mean, this country has been working on these irregular activities for centuries.
Well, then why did we let this happen? I mean, that Pentagon's former software chief said the U.S. government systems mere kindergarten level in comparison to China and other countries. But why would we allow that to happen?
Well, I think part of the problem, frankly, is we're stuck in a bit of a Cold War mindset where, the O plans, the operational plans, these are the scenarios when I was in the Pentagon for fighting other countries, Russia, China, even Iran. The O plans and the war games that I have participated in, both classified and unclassified, often look like the Battle of Midway, or during the Cold War, it was the Fulda Gap, the inter-German border, where we expected the Soviets to send in tanks. And this is not the way the Chinese are fighting. So, we haven't fully embraced how the Chinese are conceptualizing warfare. We're thinking tanks. We're building huge aircraft carriers and F-35, fifth-generation aircraft. this is predominantly not the realm that they're in. They're in these irregular activities. So I think we've got to get down to that level.
The book, Three Dangerous Men, Russia, China, Iran, you're talking about three dangerous men, but you're not talking about Putin, Xi, or Khamenei. You're talking about essentially their implementation guys.
Yeah, at the end of the day, there's all of those countries, Russia, China, and Iran, have leaders that are involved in all aspects of politics and military campaigns in their countries. What I wanted to focus on is the key individuals that are orchestrating these irregular campaigns. And on the Russian side, there's no question that Valery Gerasimov, who's chief of the army staff, he's the one that orchestrated the seizing of Crimea, the war in eastern Ukraine, the taking of Syria, and a lot of the GRU, the Russian intelligence operations, cyber operations directed at the U.S. He's extraordinarily influential. On the Iranian side, it's Qasem Soleimani, who the Trump administration targeted and killed in January of 2020, the head of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard's Quds Force. That's the primary regular force within Iran. And then with the Chinese, Zheng Yuzhou, the vice chairman of the CMC, China's main military commission. These are the leading thinkers on these kinds of activities, and that's really what I wanted to show.
And using Soleimani as an example, since he was taken out, as you mentioned, by a Trump-authorized drone strike. So he's just backfilled. I mean, this is part of the culture now, the irregular warfare in Iran, China, and Russia. So you lose basically your kingpin in Soleimani, but he's just backfilled by others who are going to pursue the same strategy, I presume.
That's absolutely correct. Soleimani was backfilled by Ismail Hani, who had been the deputy of the IRGC Quds Force for several decades. So he's continued those Iranian policies in Lebanon, supporting Hezbollah, across Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan now, and then other countries, including Yemen. So, I mean, this is the thing. It's the long-term policies of these countries will definitely go beyond the lives and the positions of these individuals, but they're instrumental in forming it, at least today.
And you argue that the Biden administration's withdrawal and perhaps the quality of it, the competency of it, reinforces this vulnerability that we have to the irregular warfare campaigns that our enemies are waging. How so?
Well, the challenge that we face in Afghanistan, I served there in U.S. Special Operations, so I've spent probably far too much time in the country. The challenge has been that in that vacuum, we've seen a big increase in Iranian Quds Force. It's that paramilitary arm that Soleimani ran. The Russian GRU that Gerasimov oversees. It's the organization that, as we found out during the Trump administration, had provided money to the Taliban to conduct attacks against U.S. and other foreign soldiers. And the Chinese have moved in. So all of those countries have expanded their activities in Afghanistan. And we had CIA there. We'd had special operations forces. We'd had fixed-wing aircraft right on the Chinese border. So I did see advantages to having such military intelligence and diplomatic personnel right on the Chinese border in case there was an increase in tension. And I think withdrawal, makes it a little more difficult.
He is Seth Jones, Senior VP and Director of the International Security Program at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. The book, Three Dangerous Men, Russia, China, Iran, and the Rise of Irregular Warfare. Seth, thanks for joining us, and good luck with the book. Appreciate it.
Great. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
Connect with Dan and Amy on the AM 560 The Answer mobile app. Just text the word app to 64636 to download the app today.
The Lou Dobbs Financial Report is brought to you by Signature Bank, helping local businesses succeed. Visit signaturebank.bank for your commercial banking needs.
I'm Lou Dobbs. Mexico's president pulls the Joe Biden Act. John Deere workers reject 5% pay increases. Those stories next. Mike Lindell, the inventor and CEO of MyPillow, wants to give back to our listeners. You can get great discounts on all MyPillow